Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, I'll be the first to admit that the classic coming-of-age story is well-mined territory, but when something comes out that takes it to the next level, that makes me stand up and notice. But if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once more, as always, uh, I'm your host. My name is Dave Voigt, and I host this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals. We pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. Give us that, hit that subscribe button. Give us the 5-star rating. We're pretty much everywhere. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where it all began, for the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because if we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. Boy, oh boy, we've got a real special one for you today because, well, it's a good one, and it's opening at the New York City Quad Cinema this coming Friday, this past Friday, June 10th, excuse me. It is Tahara. It's dark, it's funny, it's a fantastic coming of age story. I mean, it's, we've all lived through the story, or at least seen the story of kissing your best friend, but kissing your best friend at the funeral for one of your Hebrew school classmates is a little bit more complicated, to say the least. But it's about these two people, Carrie and Hannah. They've been inseparable for as long as they can remember, but when their former Hebrew school classmate Samantha commits suicide, the two girls go to her funeral, as well as the quote-unquote teen talkback session designed to be an opportunity for them to understand grief through faith, and so on and so forth. But after an innocent kissing exercise turns Carrie's world inside out, the best friends find themselves distracted by the teenage complications of lust, social status, wavering faith, and everything else in between. It was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize over at Slamdance, and it's been racking up awards all across its festival run, wherever it has played. Like I said, it is called Tahara, and it is directed by the one and only Olivia Pierce, written by Jess Zeidman, and stars Rachel Sennott, who you may recognize from Shiva Baby, and Madeline Grey DeFreece, and really some fantastic performances. And we had the unique pleasure of not only talking with Olivia, not only talking with Jess, but talking with Madeline as well, just about this film and how it all got started, and the humor behind it, and the truth in it. And it's really a special little film. It's definitely one of the better ones we've seen this year. So if you are in New York, please go check out Tahara, or if you're not, stay glued to your local listings, because it is coming to other places near you. It is a film that truly deserves to be seen, and I can't wait to see what this writing and directing team has next up their sleeve, because they've made a really special film. It's a familiar story, but it's got just enough twists and turns in it to really make it feel genuine and honest, and it's a special piece of cinema. It's kind of the reason why I do this job, so I can see movies like this. But enjoy our talk with the team behind Tahara before you go see Tahara, because not only is our talk good, but the movie's really good too. So enjoy them all. Well, I mean, obviously, just first off, I mean, thank you for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Of course.
Now, I mean, obviously, I love the movie, but I mean, Jess, I guess my first question is for you. Like, walk me through sort of the origin of the story on your end.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you enjoyed the film. I wrote this film as a student at Northwestern University where I was studying film. I took a class with the filmmaker Stephen Cohn. The class was called Writing the Micro Budget Feature, if you can believe that. And basically, I was very curious. I'd grown up going to Hebrew school. We actually filmed Tahara at the Hebrew school and synagogue that I attended as a child, Temple Bethel in Rochester. And I was very curious about exploring that part of my own identity, having, had this religious school experience, but I also, I went to secular public school for all my, you know, typical education. But I had, like Hebrew school friends, and there was like weirdness and awkwardness and crushes and things. And I'd never really seen that represented. I felt like the Jewish American experience in media is often just like the big events of
For
like bat
sure. Yeah.
mitzvah, yeah, wedding, and like the whole thing. And I was like curious about, though this does center around a large life event,
Mm.
what it's like for everybody else in this community who's like, doesn't have total agency. And the other part of it is I was 19 when I started this script. It was 2016. And I had never had conception of life after teenagerhood. Like, I'm the youngest. I have two older sisters. I was obsessed with them. I still am. But uh, but I like saw them become teens and have a whole wealth of experiences, and I would like steal their books and magazines and stuff. So I'd always had such a thing for teenager like teenage experience. And so that really is why I decided to focus on that age group in that setting. And then using the constraints of the micro budget feature, that's typically, one day, one location, only so many characters. And even that we kind of pushed. And then from there, it's just trying to find out where the drama can come from if you're in this like limited space.
Well, perfect. And I mean, I think for me in the story, I mean, the thing that really stood out for me was just sort of that duality of sort of how you're supposed to behave and how you want to behave and just how you want to react to certain situations. I'm curious, Madeline, what was your reaction when you read the script? Because I mean, it's such a unique part, and I mean, and obviously you did a great job with it.
Oh, thank you. Well, when I first read the script, I was like, oh my God, like it's not just me who like does these weird, those like weird little like teenage things. And I think like thanks to like Twitter and just like social media, like we're all kind of realizing that we like all had the same childhood. Like all those like little like weird things that you do, like especially kind of being like this in this like weird like closeted queer space where you're like, okay, like I love my friend, but like is that just like do I just love her? Like she's my friend. They're like, why am I mad at her today? Oh, because I have like this weird crush on her. It's like all these like little microcosms that like kind of like are at like the root of a queer identity in a place that like doesn't necessarily allow that queer identity to come out. All of these things, I was like, whoa, I feel so seen right now. So that was like my first reaction reading the script. And then I think like just even like through going back to it and reading it and then finally being able to film it and then getting deeper into the characters and everything, it just unlocked so much of like self-discovery and like reflection. It just, yeah, it was such an eye-opening kind of reflective perspective on like Jess is growing up that really kind of I saw a lot of like similarities with.
Well, and I mean, something I really appreciated about this, Jess, is because I mean, obviously, whenever we see stories like this being portrayed on film or TV or whatnot, moments tend to happen in flourishes, these big dramatic flourishes or these dramatic realizations. This doesn't do that. It's all very incremental and all very sort of as a matter of fact. I mean, how important was it for you to sort of maintain a very kind of grounded tone for it all?
It's a great question. I feel like partially this comes from the style with which we made it, because we had such a limited budget and limited time, we really wanted to make sure everything sort of had equal weight. Like we were really treating everything sort of similarly, where we weren't like, and this is the biggest moment and that's the biggest moment. We obviously have these moments of fantasy, with the animations where the screen, the aspect ratio expands, and that was a signifier to sort of the fantasy versus reality versus emotional arcs of these characters in a visual way. But I think something that is how life feels when you are a teenager, especially, or just a young person in general, like everything feels huge. The wins, the losses, it all feels big, and making it feel big, and yet as an audience member, we know it's small. We know they'll grow past this, and that this, though it is intense for them now, is something we are viewing, right? And so playing with that sense of scale was really important to both Olivia and I, to make sure that we could tell this teenage story, take their emotions seriously, and not kind of rely on the like, everything's happening at the big dance, like the whole thing. Because though I will say, I'm sure there's a lot of drama for these people at the big dance. We don't get to see them, but it is sort of like, ultimately the stakes are both huge and small because they are processing and figuring out who they are as people. And that is not necessarily, in huge gestures or huge actions.
No, and I mean, something else I really stood out for me was just sort of the nature of the social currency of, relationships and sex and, have you done that? Or what about this? And I mean, it's something that is so relatable and so universal. I mean, Madeline, for you, how important was it to sort of have this character really need to be in the moment? Because it wasn't a question of the bigger picture. It was having to deal with the moment.
Yeah, well, kind of like the moment of, yeah, it's really, really interesting there, because I feel like the way like Carrie kind of operates is kind of off of these cues of what Hannah's putting down, kind of like, how does she navigate these social situations? And it's like, Carrie knows what she wants, but how to actually like put her foot down and allow that to like kind of paint out her own destiny is difficult. So I think kind of having to approach everything as, okay, what is going on? Analyze, okay, now I'm apart from like this person that I usually follow. And I think even it's just so reflective of like actual like teenage girl friendships, where it's like when you have this duo, it's like when that other person becomes removed, you have to rely on just like, well, how do I move within this own like my own moment right here, right now, and how do I navigate this for me, and how do I navigate the emotions? And then it's like the action, that's the hard part, and finding your voice through that.
No, for sure. And I mean, I think you did a great job. And I mean, everyone did. It's one of those things where you watch it, it feels very, I mean, I guess the right word is relatable, which is obviously the point, because I mean, teenagers go through this no matter what your orientation. Like this is very much a universal story. And I mean, I love I mean, obviously micro budget, but I mean, it really did feel like the chemistry was bang, bang. And I mean, especially sort of the dialogue and the back and forth. I mean, Jess, when you wrote it, were you trying to make it very rapid fire? Because I mean, to me in watching it, it felt like it was almost boom, boom, boom. Like there had to be that second hand there.
Yes, I grew up watching a lot of Gilmore Girls, a lot of The West Wing, and a lot of TV. I would say my parents' love language is watching movies and TV. So I would say that influence on me and how I write dialogue definitely comes through. It's my favorite kind of thing to watch. And I also have a background in playwriting. And so it's something that, kind of comes from that playwriting place, is the importance of the dialogue, like having an effect on the emotional and logistical tactics of the day. And so something that I can do as a writer is really kind of map out how, when someone says something, how the other person responds is just important as what has just been said. And that, I think, was something that's really true when you're a teenage girl, and your currency really can be the power and the intensity and the backhandedness of your words. And so that, I think, became really important for us. And both Madeline and Rachel are extremely funny people in real life. So they're good at getting that timing down, which made it actually really sing. Because I think in a more dramatic rendering, those things could have been just very talky without being more argumentative. But I think in truth, it's a little more on the catty, on the petty, on the harsh, but not in the like extremely, they're trying to sort of fight with their words, but they also, feel very complicated about each other.
Well, and I mean,
that reminds me of this scene when you're talking about gaslighting, when I'm like, you're gaslighting me. They're like, no, I'm not. And it's like, you don't even know what that means. And it's like, they're trying to do what they think adults do and have this like conversation and talk it out. But it's like, they're still teenagers.
Right.
Well, I mean, the precision of the language, I mean, I really think is sort of the magic of it all. And I mean, I'm curious for you, Madeline. I mean, obviously this is a micro budget feature. There are not necessarily going to be a lot of days on set. How was it for you to sort of prepare to have this rapid fire sort of dialogue and have to be ready to go back and forth like this?
Well, Rachel and I met like the first day at our like costume fitting, and we were like, okay, well, we have to be best friends. We only have 18 days to shoot. Tomorrow's the kissing scene. Let's be best friends. So we would just like hang out and go to dinner, and we became like really good friends. So then, like when we got to set, so at the night before we'd like run lines and everything, but then also just like talk whatever, like talk about things, talk about family, whatever, like just really build a real friendship. So then by the time we got to set, the scene was like the easy part, right? Like we already have our friendship down. We rehearsed the night before. All we have to do is, make sure we hit our mark and get the frame down. Like the rest of it was just so natural and so fun and so just easy to kind of build that rapport and kind of find that rhythm, because we found it so organically offset.
That's fantastic. Now, I mean, Jess, I've got to ask, because I mean, you mentioned it before, but I mean, I love the animated sequences and the change of perspective specifically. Like, was that something you wrote in, or was that something you decided with Olivia? Because I loved sort of the pushing us into sort of a different world that really, as an audience member, that kind of jarred me and got me a lot more engaged in the story.
Yeah, totally. So those animated sequences were Olivia's idea. Olivia has a background as an animator, and when we were in college together, Olivia is a few years ahead of me. I saw a lot of their animated and live action projects, and those were so compelling to me. A huge reason I reached out to Olivia to work on this, because I had written these kind of sort of mystical, from like a sort of Jewish mysticism tradition, like mystical moments in the script, and playing with these ideas of like what's real, what's not real, what's not. And Olivia, on our first kind of introductory phone call, they were like, these should all be animated. And that was the first time I'd heard from somebody like a real distinct plan for those moments of surreal longing. And so that's where the animation came from. And then that question of aspect ratio is important in the way that, how do you make a movie about teenagers without making it all about social media? And that is kind of where that 1:1 Instagram aspect ratio gives you the feeling of that confinement, but without being like, this is a movie about Instagram. Because when I wrote it, it wasn't a movie about Instagram. Like, I didn't have Instagram as a teenager, so it wasn't part of my experience, but it is something obviously relevant to people who are teenagers, now, or were recently teens. And so that kind of led to the 1:1, and then the pushing out. Olivia was talking to me about this yesterday. I totally forgot, is because we planned on the 1:1, we always had the pillar box up when we were editing to make sure we had like the 1:1 set. And one time, Troy, our co-editor who edited alongside Olivia, put keyframes on the pillar box so it moved and it expanded. And Olivia was like, that is really beautiful. That is something we should incorporate. And it really speaks to, and so when I remember seeing it for the first time, I was like, that's always what I wanted, and I didn't even know, because that expansion really like speaks to a feeling that the animation to reality speaks to, but enhances it. And so a happy accident is kind of what led to that.
Well, I love happy accidents. They're my favorite kind, for sure. Now, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like for me, the thing that stood out was just, this really is a film about, at least at like telling younger people or telling audiences that, as much as we think life is supposed to be definable in sort of this little square box that we're all existing in, it's not. And just sort of deal with that. Like, for both of you, how important is it to sort of have that message out there, especially when younger audiences see this film?
Well, I think we added this, like at the very beginning of the movie starts, and it is the square, and there's like, I remember we did this way after shooting. I think it was maybe like a year, or was it? No, it was a few months, because it was before Slam Day. And we added this voiceover that Jess wrote, and I remember like when I was like sitting in like the little box, the voiceover box, and we were recording some ADR and stuff. Jess was like, read this line like, this is Carrie speaking about this. Maybe she's like in her college dorm room, like her sophomore, like end of her freshman year. And she's really kind of had a lot to like reflect on. And I think that part of just like kind of a little bit like behind the scenes, I think it really that at being at the very beginning of the movie really speaks to kind of like the entire experience. Like this experience, this one day was like a little bit traumatizing, but like the lessons that were learned were so significant. And like Carrie knows about herself more today than like she's ever known about herself. She's like free, almost free of this relationship that wasn't allowing her to be like her true self or to really like express her genuine feelings. And it's really kind of goes to show like, you know, sometimes when it feels like your entire life is existing in this box, in this tiny little moment, it's really part of like, it's part of the grid, right? There's all these moments that kind of make up this entire like masterpiece of like the ever changing, growing and like evolving you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Madeline. And that was true. That voiceover at the beginning, that sequence with the cube that turns to a square, that was actually where Olivia and I sort of switched roles for a minute. So that was Olivia's idea. And then we worked on the writing together. And then I recorded all the ADR. So then I sort of did the directing for it. And it was pretty fun. We did a nice little switch. But it was something Olivia and I had really been working on throughout the edit, going back and forth on notes and trying to figure out exactly what you're talking about, which is how can we speak to that core idea of the film, which is that it's not like this sad, everyone except for Olivia, another big reason we ended up working together, everyone wanted me to change the ending and make it be like, and then they're together and everything's okay or something. And it's like,
that would have ruined it.
I know.
Right.
But then I never would. I would. Everyone who told me that, I always said no. I would always reject them out of hand. I would be like, that's really just not how life is. And even though it's a movie and it's not life, I feel a responsibility to say that this is a story about growth. And especially, I think when we think about in the younger audience watching this, it's so important to me as someone who made this as, you know, not a teen, but close to. I was 22 when we shot the movie and 23 when it premiered and now 25 when it will come out actually. But it's one of those things where it's like, I can tell from experience, some days I still feel like I'm trapped in that box, and other days I know that there's the whole screen to play with.
Right.
And that feeling, though it may never fully go away, haven't gotten there yet, we'll find out, but is something that I think is important to talk about, where it's not like though you feel so alone, you're not alone in it. And though maybe some things tell you that like it's all going to work out, it will work out in a way that isn't how you expect or how you want, but you will grow from. And that's kind of just unfortunately a huge part of being a person.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Olivia is here. Let me let her in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Gorgeous.
Well, Olivia, obviously, thank you so much for joining us. And I mean, just congratulations on the movie and thank you for the time today.
Oh yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
Now, I mean, just to dovetail what I was asking these fantastic women about, I mean, what I really love about this film the most is that, I mean, especially for younger audiences who are going to watch this is a reminder that life doesn't happen in a box. You know, life happens everywhere. And like, how important was it for you to sort of be able to put a story like this together to remind younger people, especially when they're going through some of the awkward emotions that we see in this film, that no, life is everywhere. It's not just this sort of square thing that defines you. It's so much more.
Wow. I mean, wow. First of all, thank you for that. I think that was really important. Something that Jess and I talked a lot about was really respecting the emotions of these young teen girls. So we'd seen a fair amount of movies where it's almost like the filmmakers, and being a bit older, are making fun of how seriously the characters are taking different situations. So I think a lot had to do with that. And then beyond that, like we were inspired by all sorts of films, including films from the 80s, like The Breakfast Club, like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But something that we wanted to kind of do a little differently was make it those films actually use like people who are quite a lot older
Yeah.
in those roles as teenagers. And so something we really wanted to do is make sure that along with respecting their emotions, and doing different, I guess, stylistic decisions, like using chokers music, for example, versus more like pop music. At the same time, I also wanted to make sure that everyone was styled to look like a teenager.
For sure.
So having that sort of like clothes that are a little bit ill-fitted, having like hair where people are like parting it right down the middle, having acne and zits and all that. And I think all those things kind of worked in tandem to make sure that we're respecting the spirit of the age that everyone's in, but making it realistic at the same time.
For sure. And I mean, I talked a little bit about with Jess, but I mean, I'd love your perspective on it because I mean, for me, I think the moment where everything really clicked for me was sort of the shifting of perspective, sort of to the animated sequence and then back again. Like, how important was it for you to sort of frame this story in the box, as it were, like in sort of that Instagram box, like we were mentioning, especially considering that this is a story very much about teenagers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty important. Like, one, it was a pretty brave experiment. Like, even as we were filming, we kind of didn't know how exactly it was going to turn out. But I really felt like having the frame be so small, as it was in that 1:1 aspect ratio, would create a lot of tension, in that you can only fit max like 1.5 people in that little frame. So as people are speaking and we have them in their close-up shots, you can't see how everyone's reacting to them. And very much that's how it feels being a teenager, because like, first of all, you haven't been on this earth that long. You're still kind of figuring out like how you're coming off to people. And so when you are being sincere, when you're being honest, it can feel really, really nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing. You're not ever sure how you're going to land. And so I think that's what the square kind of does, is like when Carrie is talking, you're just seeing Carrie's face. You're not seeing how anyone's reacting. You're not seeing, you know, what Hannah might be feeling about things. And so, yeah, that's kind of what the purpose was with that. And then beyond that, the only other time that I'd seen the 1:1 aspect ratio was on Instagram. So I think a lot of my research was through Instagram and just like watching videos on there. And that was back when it had to be the 1:1 aspect ratio. It couldn't be like the vertical. So yeah, that's kind of what that was about. And then it just worked out really well when we switched to animation and having the box move and push out. So yeah, so that you do kind of feel the world around them and things do open up.
Well, I mean, it's such a simple, but it's it really is such a dramatic moment. And I mean, I think it hammers home the point of the movie just so brilliantly well. And I mean, it's one of those things where, as a cinema goer, I love seeing that stuff because it gets me even that much more engaged. And I mean, I'm kind of curious, and I mean, this is for all of you. Michelle, Madeline, I'll start with you. Like, was there a piece of work or like a movie that sort of had the light bulb click for you and made you want to be an actor?
Oh, geez. So I definitely started with a theater background. But so kind of like bringing two things together. My favorite movie growing up and has always been is Singing in the Rain, because it's just like,
Okay.
Yeah, it's like so it has like it's Broadway, right? Like it's like old Hollywood, and then this like grandiose like big stage and lights and sparkly costumes and everything. Yeah, Singing in the Rain was like the movie that got me interested in like theater. And then with theater, everything was like so cool. And then I went to college and there was this major for acting for film. And I was like, wait, I can do that? Like there's a path that I can take. I don't have to just move to Hollywood and say, like, put me in. Like, I can actually like learn how to be an actor for this thing. So Singing in the Rain for me is like that perfect combination that has really just inspired me to be able to take like the root of what I've always loved, but then also like my newfound love of like film and especially television. Like Jess was saying, I'm big into television. I've always been big into television. Kind of making both worlds work. This big, you know, it can still be grandiose and sparkly and exciting on screen as well.
For sure. Jess, what about you?
Oh man, it's a really hard question. I want to say a film that got me into the idea of indie filmmaking and was a huge inspiration for this film is Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig's Frances Ha.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
that was a very crucial movie for me in high school. Me and my at the time kind of toxic best friend would watch that movie all the time, snuggled up in bed together, and it was like a huge thing. And it's one of my absolute favorite movies. And it was one of those things where I think that movie specifically, it was so stirring to me. Though I mean, they do go to Paris, and that's a little different than ours, but I was so intrigued by the idea that this movie could just be about someone kind of losing a best friend, but
Yeah.
not in a hugely dramatic way, just in the way that life had them moving apart from each other. And from there, I think I got really into the idea of like, what are these kind of like Noah Baumbach, Greta Gerwig, Hannah Takes the Stairs, all those mumblecore movies, all of that sort of stuff. And then going to college in Chicago, watching mumblecore movies every day of the week. But yeah, I would say that was a big movie for me that I watched in high school that was like, oh, I could definitely see myself making something like this.
Olivia, what about you?
I mean, it's sort of interesting in that it took me a while, I think, to become a director. First of all, I wanted to be a tattoo artist, like growing up. I wanted to paint. Like it was always that sort of like visual art. But then when I got to college, I didn't have a visual art degree. And so I found film and I started in animation. But I would say the films that actually inspired me were all music videos.
Okay, all right.
And that's where I was seeing like Black and brown directors like ruling and doing their thing, like Hype Williams. And I would study that. And I thought they were the coolest directors because they were experimental filmmakers, down to the point of, now that I think about it, Queen has this music video for Radio Gaga.
Oh, I
It's
know
not a
that.
square.
Oh, that's a good video. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great video.
And it's not a square aspect ratio, but they have that 4:3 aspect ratio that expands out.
Yeah.
It's done before, like every cool thing you see in a feature film, I swear to you, a music video director has done it first.
Well, I think you're right. But I mean, I'm so looking forward to audiences getting to see this film because, I mean, to me, this is a perfect encapsulation of what indie cinema is supposed to be. It's honest, it's truthful, but it's having fun and it's just being genuine. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's why you tell stories and that's why you put stuff like this out there. And I mean, I'm just curious for all of you, now that you are on the brink of showing this film to the world that you've slaved over for years, what is your hope that audiences pull away from this?
Oh, it's a great question. Here, I'll start and then I'll pass it. I think my hope really is that people engage with the film in a real way. I'm hoping people take the time to see it in theaters if they're able to.
For sure.
I think it'll be such a great experience to see it in theaters. And I also would love for people to, talk about it amongst their friends and their communities. Something that's big for Olivia and I'm sure Madeline too, is it's like kind of my dream with this movie is that when it comes out, somebody sees it and they're like, we got to play this movie at the library. That's kind of my big hope, is like the idea that it's something that becomes a summer screening series or a thing. And because that's how I saw so many movies growing up. And I just think that's how you get to like go to the movies with your friends and it's this thing and you're outside or you're in the back room of the library or you're like in some weird cafe. And then it becomes more of a communal experience. So I'm hoping people watch it, they watch it with other people and they have a chance to talk about it.
Yes, no, exactly. This is the sort of movie where my family is big on talking through movies. Like we like going to theaters and then just like gossiping about the people in the movie while we're there. And this is a perfect movie for that. Like there's so much like gossip happening. So yeah, I think that's my hope as well, Jess. I think I couldn't have said it better. And then beyond that, like I hope that other artists and filmmakers see this and decide to try some difficult stuff and challenge themselves. Like we tried a lot of different things from like the animation to the aspect ratio, like a lot of weird camera stuff. So I hope filmmakers see it and see a place for that as well.
All right, Madeline, bring it home.
So I really loved what Olivia was talking about earlier when they were saying like bringing the actual truth and like reality to like teenagers, right? I feel like we see kind of like the Riverdale teenagers these days. And I love that within our movie we bring back like the actual bare bones. What is the actual teenage experience? How can we actually take this seriously and validate the feelings of these young people and like let them actually see themselves in the world? And I hope we kind of like this inspires that to like come back into film, like really like the truth and like the nitty gritty and like the really deep, you know, the emotions that kind of like we've all experienced and have like, you know, all those things that make us who we are now, really taking those moments seriously through film, I think
For
is
sure.
my favorite thing about this movie. And I hope we see that more.
It is such a reminder that you can tell valid, emotionally resonant stories in a engaging way with no money, which is exactly what you've all done. And I mean, I absolutely loved it. And I mean, just, you know what? Thank you so much again for the time, and congratulations on the film. I mean, you should be really proud. You've done a real great piece of work here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.